In the chaotic current of the American entertainment industry, where Hollywood scandals, wild parties, and multi-million-dollar divorces dominate the headlines, one family defied the trajectory to build an empire worth tens of millions of dollars. That was the Duggar family. They weren't selling Hollywood glamour or provocative stage performances. They sold the American public a commodity far rarer and more expensive: absolute sanctity in the heart of a modern society full of temptation. For over a decade, the show 19 Kids and Counting became the golden goose for the TLC network. Their formula was simple yet incredibly effective: a faithful couple, 19 obedient children, no TV, no rock music, no premarital sex, and not even an intimate hug before engagement. For a large segment of conservative Christian public, the Duggars weren't just a family on screen. They were a symbol, a beacon of hope that traditional values could survive and thrive in the digital age. Within that system, Josh Duggar was a crown jewel. As the eldest of the 19 siblings, Josh was groomed from the start to be the perfect successor to his father, Jim Bob Duggar. He wasn't just the face of the family's younger generation. He was living proof that their rigorous educational methods worked. Josh married Anna, a girl from a similar background, and quickly started a family. He even stepped into the Washington political scene as a lobbyist for the Family Research Council, a powerful organization dedicated to promoting traditional family values. But behind the radiant smiles on the red carpet and the televised prayer sessions, a much darker script was being written. When the truth finally exploded in 2021, leading to his prison sentence in 2022, it wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a media nuclear blast that wiped out the legacy the Duggars had spent 15 years building. The question is, how could a system designed for the tightest moral control foster one of the most sinful individuals? And more importantly, how did Josh Duggar deceive millions for so long? To understand the magnitude of the fall, we must first deconstruct the brand structure of the Duggar family. This wasn't a normal family. It was a business model built on religious faith. Jim Bob Duggar operated 19 Kids and Counting like a multi-level marketing scheme for morality. While other reality shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians focused on superficiality and glitz, the Duggars chose austerity and faux humility. They wore simple clothes. The daughters wore skirts below the knee, and the sons always wore ties. This difference created a psychological fortress for the audience. Viewers felt safe watching them, believing this was the last bastion of purity. Josh was tasked with market expansion. He wasn't meant to just be a reality star. He was pushed into the center of political power. His job in Washington was a strategic move to elevate the family's influence from entertainment to social policymaking. He appeared in sleek suits, speaking about protecting children and the sanctity of marriage. This status created an armor of steel that shielded him from early suspicions. Every child born into a family wasn't just a new member. They were new content for the show, an opportunity to boost ratings and reinforce the message that being fruitful was God's blessing. The audience watched Josh grow from a boy into a man, a husband, and a father. This emotional bond blinded the public. They felt like part of the family, and therefore, they didn't want to believe their favorite eldest son could harbor such unforgivable shadows. Every empire has cracks, and for the Duggars, the first one appeared in 2015. This was when Duggar's scandal became the hottest keyword on social media. Reports leaked that Josh Duggar had engaged in sexual misconduct against his own sisters when he was a teenager. This should have been the end for anyone else. But the Duggars executed a crisis management campaign that is a textbook example of deception. Instead of admitting the severity of the issue, they turned into a story of repentance and redemption. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar appeared on Fox News to explain that these were just mistakes of youth and that Josh had been disciplined by the family, counseled by pastors, and had received God's forgiveness. They successfully shifted the narrative from crime to stumble. Even the victims, Josh's own sisters, were brought onto television to say they had forgiven their brother. This was the pinnacle of manipulation. By using faith as a shield, the Duggars transformed Josh from an abuser into a man on the path of self-correction. However, the real bombshell dropped shortly after in the same year, the Ashley Madison data leak. For those who don't know, Ashley Madison was a dating site specifically for married people seeking affairs with the slogan, "Life is short. have an affair. Josh Duggar's name was prominently on the list of paid customers. He wasn't just there for fun. He spent thousands of dollars seeking short-term flings while his wife, Anna, was pregnant with their fourth child. This time, the model husband mask melted away completely. The public began to realize a horrifying truth. Josh Duggar wasn't a man who made a mistake. He was a man addicted to lies. While he stood on political platforms condemning the moral decay of society, he was the one most deeply mired in it. The Ashley Madison event caused 19 kids and counting to be canceled immediately. But, like a horror movie monster, the Duggar empire wasn't dead yet. They quickly returned with a new show, counting on removing Josh from the frame but keeping the entire old value system to continue profiting from public curiosity. To understand why this story captures millions, we need to dive deep into Josh Duggar's psychological nature. He was not an impulsive criminal. He was a systemic one. Josh understood the rules of the moral world he lived in, and he used those very rules as camouflage. In the Duggar world, all problems were solved internally through prayer and family deterrence rather than the law. This environment created a gray zone for Josh to operate. He knew that as long as he said the right words, wore the right clothes, and showed up at church every Sunday, the family and community would protect him at all costs. Josh Duggar's danger lay in the fact that he weaponized faith. He turned the audience's devotion into capital to cover his darkest behaviors. The 2015 scandal was just the overture. What happened between 2019 and 2021 is what truly made America shudder. When FBI agents raided Josh's used car dealership in Arkansas, they weren't looking for evidence of infidelity or youthful mistakes. They were raiding a network harboring some of the most toxic content imaginable. At this point, we are no longer talking about a fallen reality star. We are talking about someone who leveraged every privilege, fame, money, and protection of a powerful family to commit sins in the shadows of the internet. The contrast between the image of a father holding his child and what was found on his work computer is a direct assault on the conscience of anyone following this story. The year 2015 was a mere warning shot across the bow of the Duggar fleet, but 2019 was a torpedo that finally sent their flagship to the bottom of the ocean. Imagine the scene: a dusty, unassuming used car lot named Wholesale Motor Cars in Arkansas. To the casual observer, it was just Josh's attempt at a humble redemption, a blue-collar penance after being unceremoniously evicted from the political corridors of Washington, D.C. But for federal agents, this wasn't a car lot. It was a digital crime scene, a Pandora's box of systematic depravity hidden behind lines of encrypted code. The FBI raid in November 2019 wasn't a stroke of bad luck. It was a surgical conclusion of a long-term digital manhunt. When agents seized the electronic devices, they didn't just find boring spreadsheets of used car sales. They unlocked a vault containing some of the most toxic, soul-crushing content the human mind can conjure. The absolute irony is that while Josh was using his administrative privileges to access material documenting the horrific exploitation of children, he was maintaining the public facade of a devoted father to 7 children just outside those office walls. This is the ultimate psychological fracture of the elite, the total separation between the public saint and the shadow predator. Josh wasn't just lying to his audience. He was living a double life with the precision of a moral schizophrenic. Every time he signed a document supporting family values, he turned back to his screen to feed a darkness that defies description. The crisis management strategy deployed by the Duggar patriarch, Jim Bob, is a masterclass in what Society Noir calls toxic silence. Instead of facing the light, they retreated into the shadows of their own making. Jim Bob, the billionaire architect of this empire, didn't hesitate to deploy a small army of elite attorneys. Their goal wasn't to prove Josh's innocence, because digital forensics don't lie, but to manufacture reasonable doubt. They began pointedly blaming anyone but the Golden Boy, anonymous employees, mysterious hackers, or the classic deep state conspiracy. The most chilling element of this era, however, was the stance of Anna Duggar. Instead of shielding her children from a man with a documented history of domestic predation, Anna chose to stand by her man in a display of what can only be described as systematic brainwashing. In the fundamentalist world the Duggars curated, divorce is considered a greater sin than the crimes Josh was accused of. They prioritized the integrity of the family brand over the safety of the next generation. Anna appeared at the courthouse with a practiced, hollow smile, holding the hand of a man the evidence described as a monster. That isn't love. That is a chilling end result of a life lived in a theological echo chamber. Josh Duggar is a defective product of a perfection-obsessed assembly line. He learned early on that as long as you looked the part, you held the power. When a system values optics over substance, it inadvertently creates perfect camouflage for predators. Josh exploited his golden child privilege to its maximum capacity, convinced that he operated above the laws of both God and man. His betrayal wasn't just a legal violation, it was a grand theft of faith. The very money earned from preaching morality was being used to fund the most immoral habits imaginable. By late 2021, the trial of Josh Duggar became a global digital coliseum. Here, every whitewashing technique the family had mastered failed against the cold, hard logic of a hard drive. Federal forensic experts presented evidence that no pastor could exorcise, including the timestamps, site logs, and desperate attempts to hide his digital tracks. This was a moment the noir mask finally cracked. The peers and politicians who once craved an endorsement from the Duggars suddenly couldn't find their phone chargers fast enough to avoid the calls. TLC, the network that built their mansion, scrubbed the family from their archives with corporate ruthlessness. But the most devastating blow came from within the fortress itself. For the first time, the Duggar code of silence was broken when Jill Duggar, one of the sisters Josh had harmed years prior, publicly stood on the side of justice. The cracks in the foundation were no longer just aesthetic. The building was coming down. Josh's freefall had finally reached terminal velocity, dragging 15 years of a carefully manufactured legacy into the abyss of permanent disgrace. As we watch Josh Duggar in that courtroom, stripped of his expensive suits and his television lighting, we see the absolute emptiness of the elite persona. There is a dark comedy in the fact that the man who spent his life lecturing others on freedom through faith finally found his only escape within the 4 stone walls of a federal prison. It is a bitter irony that a family so terrified of the outside world was ultimately dismantled by the rot growing in its own heart. Money couldn't buy them salvation. It only bought them a longer rope. The 12-year federal prison sentence handed to Josh Duggar was far more than a mere digit on a legal document. It served as a brutal period at the end of a 2-decade-long psychological manipulation project. When the doors of the federal penitentiary slammed shut, they simultaneously locked away the most glittering chapter of a family that once branded itself as the ultimate moral compass of America. But at Society Noir, we do not merely stare at the prison bars. We examine the jagged shards of a mask that has been utterly pulverized. Let us begin by dissecting the reaction of Jim Bob Duggar during the final, agonizing hours of his empire. Instead of displaying genuine remorse or acknowledging the systemic rot within his household, he continued to operate his political machinery with a level of absurdity that defies logic. Even as his eldest son faced the most stomach-churning evidence of child exploitation, Jim Bob made the baffling decision to run for a seat in the Arkansas State Senate. This was not a display of courage. It was a pathological arrogance of a man blinded by his own mythos. He truly believed that power and capital had created a safety buffer so thick that public opinion could be bribed with empty prayers and glossy campaign posters. But he was wrong. This time, the Duggar brand was no longer an asset. It had transformed into a toxic waste product that no rational person dared to touch. Jim Bob's humiliating defeat at the polls was the definitive death knell for the family's era of dominance. The voters sent a razor-sharp message. You cannot preach salvation to the masses while harboring a predator beneath your own roof. This is the psychological breaking point we analyze at Society Noir. When those in power believe they can fabricate reality through the total control of information, they inevitably forget that reality always finds a way to bleed through the smallest cracks. We must also look at the fate of the muses imprisoned within this system, most notably Anna Duggar. Anna is not just a wife. She is a haunting case study of an individual whose identity has been systematically erased by a predatory ideology. In the Duggar universe, women are taught that submission is the highest virtue, even when that submission leads them directly into a monster's lair. Anna stood there, amidst the blinding flashes of paparazzi cameras, wearing the same hollow, practiced smile, declaring her unwavering faith in a man who betrayed every sacred value they claimed to uphold. This is not loyalty. It is cognitive paralysis. She is the victim of a calculated brainwashing process where personal autonomy is traded for the deceptive security of a velvet-lined family structure. However, in that suffocating darkness, sparks of defiance began to fly. The public confrontation between Jill Duggar, her husband Derek Dillard, and the patriarch Jim Bob was an unprecedented fracture in the fortress. They did what no one else in the Duggar clan dared. They demanded justice and financial transparency. Jill revealed a sickening truth, that for years they worked as television slaves without receiving a single cent of fair compensation, while Jim Bob pocketed millions from lucrative network deals. Money, once again, revealed itself as the root of every lie. When blood ties are treated as business transactions and affection is weaponized for profit, collapse is the only mathematical certainty. Jill Duggar's memoir, Counting the Cost, is far more than a book. It is a formal indictment of the dictatorial patriarchal regime Jim Bob carefully curated. She described an environment where fear was masqueraded as love, and total control was rebranded as spiritual protection. Jill's bravery triggered a domino effect. Other siblings began to find their voices, or at the very least, quietly retreated from the family's suffocating grip. The crystal palace of perfection had officially shattered, exposing deep-seated internal conflicts and resentments that had been suppressed for decades. Now, let's perform a forensic autopsy on the Duggar legacy. What have they truly left for the world? It certainly isn't a generation of saintly children, but rather a somber masterclass in the dangers of performative piety. They prove that a family can resemble a paradise on a television screen while functioning as a psychological prison in real life. The ruthlessness of the entertainment industry played a pivotal role here as well. TLC exploited the Duggars' eccentricities for profit for 15 years, intentionally ignoring glaring red flags in exchange for high ratings. When the scandal became too loud to ignore, they discarded the family like a used trash bag, proving that in the world of the elite, you only have value as long as you maintain a clean aesthetic. The downfall of Josh Duggar is a quintessential modern tragedy. He was a man who spent his entire existence playing the role of a saint while his soul was decomposing from the inside out. His pursuit of depraved pleasures was a violent, extreme reaction to a life lived in a bell jar of rigid, suffocating rules. When you forbid a human being from being authentic, they will find a way to become a monster in the shadows. Josh was not just a perpetrator. He was a living evidence of the failure of the glass cage education his parents worshipped. In the grand panoramic view, we see a cruel, ironic loop. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar began with the ambition to change the world through their model family, but they ended as objects of global contempt. They built an empire on sand, where every brick was held together by the mortar of deception. Today, when the name Duggar is whispered, people no longer think of radiant smiles or sermons on faith. Instead, they envision cold courtrooms, FBI seized hard drives, and the silent, lingering pain of victims who were ignored in the pursuit of a family's manufactured glory. It is that true power does not lie in how many people you can control, but in whether you have the courage to face the truth about yourself. The Duggars had everything, wealth, fame, and respect, but they lacked the most essential ingredient, integrity. And in the world of light and shadow, integrity is the only shield that can protect you from the relentless judgment of time. Josh Duggar now sits in a cell, surrounded by 4 walls of gray stone, where the television lights can never reach him. Perhaps that is the only place he truly belongs, a place where the mask no longer is currency, and the naked truth is the only thing left. The Duggar empire has fallen, leaving behind a vast, echoing void and a chilling warning to anyone attempting to build a reputation on the route of morality. A deathly silence now blankets the mansion in Arkansas, a silence that follows a devastating storm. It is not the peace of faith, but the silence of a ruin after all the lives have been carried away by the wind. We have just concluded the final autopsy of one of the greatest psychological frauds of the 21st century. Remember, in the shadows of power, the truth never dies. It simply waits for the right moment to choke those who try to bury it.